Hello, hello, hello. Silenzio. Uh, Thank you. Good evening and welcome everybody to the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron's Cruising Division January presentation. And it's wonderful to see so many people have rolled tonight. It was a very complicated process and very limited, and it's a fantastic roll-up considering, and we've got, unfortunately, had to turn some people away. For those who don't know me, I'm David Henry. I'm the chairman of the Cruising Division. And I'd also like to make a special welcome tonight to Hugo van Kretschmar and his wife Karen, our presenter. Thank you. And this evening Hugo is going to give us a little, to start with, a little background on his cruising vessel, the Ada Hardy, a very impressive vessel. And after dinner, well, that introduction will run for about 20-25 minutes, and we'll serve dinner about 7:30 and start the main presentation, or Hugo will start the main presentation about 8 o'clock. And when that's over, we'll allow 10 or 15 minutes for discussion and question time. To aid that, we'll have a couple of people with handheld microphones who can run around and so that everybody can hear the questions. I've got to say that I don't know Hugo very well. I know who he is, but I'd just like to make a little introduction, if I may, to his introduction. I remember I think it was after the 2003 or 4 Sydney Hobart race, hanging around Constitution Dock there after the race. Hugo was there standing. He had been the Commodore of the CYC, so I sort of knew him from that a bit. And he was standing on this huge, massive, tough-looking vessel that didn't look at all like a racing yacht. It had a very short mast. I thought, oh, that's unusual. That vessel looks like it could go to the South Pole. Well, I was half right, and he'll demonstrate that as we go along tonight. Hugo.
Good evening, and thank you, David. And David's run through the program, so I'll try and keep to the schedule. My biggest problem is always trying to keep it tight and keep it within the time frame that's been allowed, and I'll do my best. I will warn you that it's a highly visual presentation, so if you can't see the screens properly, you probably need to get yourself in a position where you can. So let's rock and roll. Okay, we'll start off with the dreaming. This project started more than 20 years ago with a lot of dreaming on my part. Just let me work out how this is going to work. That's annoying. And I was greatly inspired by a beautifully illustrated book called Antarctic Oasis, written by a couple called Tim and Pauline Carr. And Tim and Pauline purchased a 28-foot 1898 Falmouth Bay punt, very similar to the one shown in the picture on the left-hand side there in Malta in 1967. The boat was in total disrepair when they bought her, and they spent many years restoring her before heading off to explore the world. And in 1992, they found themselves in South Georgia and fell in love with the place and stayed there for the next 5 years. I became fascinated by their adventures in this uniquely remote part of the world, remembering that this was well before mass tourism, and I suspect there's quite a few people in this room who've probably been to South Georgia in the meantime. I haven't made it there yet, but I made it my goal to go and visit South Georgia on my own boat. Having set myself that goal, I then set my mind to the kind of boat that I would want to undertake this trip. And it needed to be robust, seaworthy, and with long-range capability. It needed to be comfortable and needed to be equipped for cold climate cruising. But most importantly for me, it had to be built of wood. You see, I'm a sailor by heart, but many years ago worked out that, in my mind, that cruising on motor vessels is a far more comfortable and reliable way of getting around the world than on a sailing yacht. And the only way that I could cross over to the dark side was for my power vessels to be a timber boat, so that at least my sailing mates would still talk to me. And quite possibly even be jealous of the fact that they didn't have the courage to make the same decision themselves. It wasn't long before I came across the Ada Hardy, which after one inspection and a short sea trial I purchased in 2003. She's 62 feet long, has a draft of 8 feet, a displacement of 80 tonnes as light ship, that's without fuel and water, so she goes about 95 when she's fully laden. As you can see from the photo of her on the slip on the left, she has a traditional full keel, like a traditional yacht underwater body. And after completing the purchase, I recruited a crew of sailing buddies and flew down to Tasmania and delivered her back to Sydney to the CYC. And I'll never forget arriving there on a Saturday afternoon with a bar full of people going, "What the hell is this crazy Dutchman up to now?" So, quick history of the boat. She was built by a boat builder called Bernard Wilson in Triabunna in Tasmania for a long-time cray fisherman by the name of Max Hardy, who named the boat after his mother, Ada Hardy. She was originally a ketch, as you can see on the photo on the right, which by the time I bought her, the mizzen mast had been removed. She's carvel planked with glued and splined seams. Totally built out of celery top pine, other than a 18-inch by 18-inch hardwood keel that runs the full length of the boat. And she's powered by a single engine Gardner 8L3B that actually dates back to 1972, so the engine is 15 years older than what the boat is itself. That engine swings a 56-inch diameter prop, it's about this big, with 4 blades on it. We spent nearly 3 years after purchasing the boat cruising locally up and down to, went out to Lord Howe, back down to Tasmania for a cruise and up to the Gold Coast, all the while planning and mulling over how I wanted to convert the boat to getting to know the boat and how we were going to convert it to do the things that we wanted to do. And in 2006, I took her back down to Tasmania to start the conversion work. All the work was carried out at Triabunna, where the boat was originally built, and which very nicely kept the provenance of the boat in my mind intact, in that she was actually rebuilt in the same place where she was built in the first place. And my good dear departed friend, who many of you probably here know, Graham Frizzle Freeman, put together the build team and supervised the project for me. And he was ably assisted by both Bernard Wilson, who originally built the boat, and Max Hardy, who lived in the area still, who apparently were there at least every second or third day, putting their 2 bobs worth in as to exactly what needed to be done and when and how. We stripped the boat completely, saving only the main engine, the running gear, the steering systems and the tanks, and everything else, the fit-outs, electrics, plumbing, everything else was new. So as you can see from those photos there, she was stripped out and built a new wheelhouse. And in this photo you can see the wheelhouse going on and high-tech transport down to the dock. And at some stage during the process, we took the boat to Hobart to put her in a shed to strip all the hull back and do the repainting of the top sides, and then took her back to Triabunna to finish the project off. Quickly running through interior layouts. Some of you might not be able to see this all that well, but this plan is of the wheelhouse area that basically, it's a big, I'll show you some photos afterwards, it's a big roomy area. It's our day lounge. And it's got a bunk area at the rear that is useful as a second watch member to be able to be asleep while you're cruising, because again, being a powerboat, you don't actually need to be awake while you're going anywhere. You can. Directly underneath that, in the shaded area through here is the main saloon, which comprises of a large settee area, a smaller cabin over here. It's not going to work too well. Galley in the rear and a plant room at the back and a bathroom. And then the forward end of the boat, the owner's cabin is what used to be the freezer well of the boat. That's on the right-hand side of the screen, which is accessed from the main saloon, and it has an ensuite and a queen-size bed. And at the very front of the boat in the forecastle area it's our guest accommodation, and that's got a double bunk and then 2 high-level single bunks and its own ensuite, and then there's a small plant room that looks after water makers and various other things In between the two areas, the blank area used to be where the wet well was located. Some of you might be familiar with cray boats. Often had half the boat was flooded with fresh seawater to keep the crayfish alive. That area I converted, partly used up part of that to put in an additional 4,000 litres of diesel in a big diesel tank, a 1,200 litre sewerage tank, and then on top of that built a large deck locker to store all the toys and equipment and everything else that you need to do extensive cruising. So here's some images of the wheelhouse, looking both forward and aft. Main saloon area directly underneath that, with the stairs going that lead up to the lead house and up to the wheelhouse, and through the doorway to the left is the galley. There's the galley, which is a bit like your kitchen at home, only better. And then the foredeck area, which is really our main living room day area, as long as the weather conditions are suitable. It's a huge area that I actually had my 50th birthday party on the boat many years ago now. And we had a 4-piece string quartet up in the bow and 70 guests on board. And it all worked absolutely fabulously. And then the most important part of the boat, being the engine room, houses my Gardner 8L3B. She's looking particularly magnificent in those photos, and those photos were taken in 2016-17. I took the engine out of the boat when she was in Spain and shipped it to the UK to a Gardner specialist and completely rebuilt the engine from the crankcase up. So she's now as good as gold and will last my lifetime and probably 3 other lifetimes after that. This engine is rated 200 horsepower. It doesn't sound like a lot, but they're big horses. They're Clydesdale horses. It's got a massive torque and swings a 500 kilo flywheel. It has 8 cylinders in line with 24 litre cubic capacity within those cylinders. Engine weighs just over 3 tonnes and maxes out at 1100 RPM. With a cruising RPM, we cruise at about 975 RPM. And this is her in a finished condition. So we now carry 12,000 litres of fuel. Originally when I bought the boat it was 7,000. 2,500 litres of water, and as I said before, 1,200 litres of sewerage storage. We cruise at 8.2 knots, using about 28 litres an hour, which averages out about 3.5 litres per nautical mile, and that gives us a range of 3,500 nautical miles. So when the boat was finished in 2008, we started our journey. I'm just going to quickly fly you through this and then do a quick slideshow before dinner that sort of covers this same ground. So first season, we went up the New South Wales, Queensland coast as far as Lizard Island, then across to New Guinea, and we spent 2 months in the Louisiade Islands, and then back to Laguna Keys, the Whitsundays. The following year, I delivered the boat with a couple of mates from Whitsundays round to Darwin over about a three-week period, and then we spent 3 months on a Darwin down to Broome and return trip, and so basically 3 months in the Kimberley area, and flew various guests in and out using light aircraft and flying in and out of Broome, and just had an absolutely wonderful time there. At the end of that year, I took the boat to Phuket via Singapore. We did non-stop from Darwin to Singapore, just trying to stop in Indonesia. At that time, probably still was just too complicated. We stopped at Singapore for a couple of days, just some R&R, and then finished up in Phuket for a total of 14 days. We then ended up in Phuket for nearly 3.5 years, which wasn't our intention in the first place, but at that time the Somalia Gulf of Aden pirate problem was running full steam, and we were basically stayed there hoping that situation would clear up and that we could then travel on our own bottom there. Eventually we ended up shipping the boat, which I'll get to in a moment, but we loved the 3.5 years that we spent there and did many trips around the Phuket area, up to the Magui Islands, which are part of Myanmar before Myanmar actually opened up, over the Andaman Islands, which are actually part of India, and a number of very important trips down to Langkawi, being a duty-free port, to keep the grog locker fully stocked. Eventually in 2013 we gave up and then shipped the boat to Turkey. I was really reluctant to do this and actually spent nearly a year talking to sort of marine security consultants, ex-SAS people, to try and organise some form of armed escort arrangement on board. And we came up with a plan where I would pick up 4 mercenaries basically in Sri Lanka and then offload them once we got into the Red Sea. The cost of that was going to be very similar to the cost of shipping the boat, and I was sort of quite determined to actually do that because I wanted to go there on my own bottom. And when I confirmed with him that I wanted to go ahead, he said to me, he said, "Hugo," he said, "I can take you on a bicycle tour in Afghanistan with the same risks and the same dangers for a quarter of the cost." And he was basically saying to me, like, "We can do this, but you're mad, don't do it." And that was enough for me to go, fair enough, we'll stick her on the ship. So we did. So then from 2013 to 2017, we spent 4 seasons in the Mediterranean. And then in 2017, the last 8 years, we travelled up the Atlantic coast of Europe and finished up in Lübeck in the Baltic in Germany. And it's from there where I'll start off the details of our cruising after dinner. And I think the next slide takes us into, so this is a slide presentation, runs for about 4 minutes, and then we'll have dinner and then get going again after that. We got sound?
When I die and I lay me to rest, gonna go to the place that's
Hello. Hello. Got it working. All right, I think everybody's had dinner now, so we'll bring Hugo back to the stand for his major presentation.
Right, good evening again. And let's sit back and relax and take a trip through Norway and Greenland. Okay, so this, as I said, brings us to the start of our 2018 trip that we spent in the far north of the Atlantic Ocean. In the spring of 2018, starting from Lübeck in Germany, we cruised north up firstly past Copenhagen and the western side of Sweden, short section, and then across to Norway, and then all the way up the Norwegian coast, getting as far north as the Lofoten Islands, which is sort of well north of the Arctic Circle. For a period, that cruise took us 4 months. We finished up in September up there, left the boat in a town called Buda, which I'll talk about a bit more later, and then flew back in February of 2019 to do a 3-week-long midwinter Northern Lights cruise. I can't speak highly enough about our cruising experience in Norway. The Norwegians we found to be the most wonderful, genuinely friendly and helpful people, and as an extra bonus, they nearly all speak perfect English. Nearly all our travels were in very sheltered waters. Out of the 2,000 miles of coastline, and we did many more miles travelling in and out of fjords and going, tens and scores of miles inland. I think of the 2,000 miles, there's probably only about 300 miles that are actually exposed to the open sea, and the rest of the time you're in behind islands and sheltered skerries and waterways and the likes. And of that 300 miles is broken up, and there's 20 miles here and 30 miles there. So just wait for the right day, and you never have to see a serious wave. Abundant anchorages. I think a 4-month period we might have shared an anchorage on half a dozen occasions with another boat, and the rest of the time we had everywhere to ourselves. The further north we went, the less crowded it became. It was later into the season as well, so even the Norwegians had stopped boating, and we basically had the whole coastline to ourselves pretty much. The infrastructure in Norway is just unbelievable. There's at least 15 airports all up and down the coast, so we had 4 different groups of friends join us during the time. So for them to fly in and out from Oslo to wherever it was that we picked them up, and then they could leave from another spot further up the coast was just magnificent. And the internet, the wireless internet access in Norway is just mind-boggling. There wasn't once in the entire time that we were there that we didn't have 4 bars of 4G internet coverage. Even in the narrowest of fjords, without a house in sight anywhere, and you've still got the full thing blaring through. Absolutely extraordinary. So I'm going to swap this around a bit. I'm going to now move forward to another slideshow to go through the Norway bit, and then I'm going to come back and talk about various sections of it. But firstly, I just want to quick sidetrack to talk about some drone training, where in the previous show you never saw any drone footage. In 2017, when the boat was wintered in Gibraltar, I bought a drone online, a fairly expensive piece of kit, and decided I wanted to get some really sexy footage of the boat underway and that sort of stuff. And so when I arrived, I'd never flown a drone before, knew nothing about it. So I spent the first week or 2 practicing on land on the first shot, and then when I gained a little bit of confidence, at a quiet mooring with the boat at anchor and flying it off the boat, with the real intention being to be able to launch it while we're steaming along and take video and then land it back on the boat as we're moving. Now, this was a fairly sophisticated drone that had some automated functions, one of which was an auto takeoff thing that when you set the drone on the ground and turn it on, it immediately, with its inbuilt GPS, decided it knew exactly where it was. And you could then either press a takeoff button, where the drone would automatically launch itself about 1 metre off the ground, directly above the spot where it started from, and just hover there until you decided to take control and fly it wherever. And on the reverse side, on the way home, if you wanted to bring the drone back, you just press home, and it'd fly all the way back to being 1 metre above exactly where it took off. Wonderful bit of technology. The first time I decided to fly the drone while we're underway, beautiful, calm day, and I'd set the drone up on the foredeck and turned it on and got myself organised and pressed the automatic takeoff button. This drone didn't go to a metre above the ground. It flew immediately, a million miles in between my legs, took a chip out of both shins. Fortunately, the front door of the main saloon was open. It flew through that and crash landed into the back of the couch in the main saloon. The problem being that this drone was looking at going vertically above a point that I'd set about 10 minutes early, which was about half a mile behind where we were at that point. It was on a mission to get back to that point. Anyway, so that was the end of my drone flying activity for that year. That's why you didn't see any drone flying footage before then. It was damaged beyond use that season. I brought it back home and then learnt while in the off season back here in Australia to fly it. And in this next video, you'll start to see some drone footage. Thank you. So one of the absolute surprising joys of our time in Norway was what I've called here Midnight Mountain Symphonies, and there was two of them. Firstly, remember that this is middle of summer, so it's pretty much daylight, 22 hours of the day, never really gets totally dark. And particularly in the fjords, there's waterfalls everywhere with all the winter snow melt that just melts all the way through the summer and just cascades down the sides of these fjords. So it was incredibly often that we were anchored, and to the wonderful sort of background noise of this rushing, cascading water down the hills as you're lying in your bunk at night. And this particular shot was in a horseshoe-shaped bay. There was actually 9 waterfalls all falling down into the same bay. It was almost deafening. Well, not deafening, but it was enough to almost go, let's close the hatch. Like, it's time to go to sleep now, even though it's such a beautiful thing. But the other one was that we struck quite often at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, you'd suddenly get this heavy sort of Viking type music, similar to the soundtrack that I was just playing, echoing through the hills. And it would seem that to me that the Norwegians, having been been shut down for the whole winter and sort of cocooned in their houses and making the most of the summer sunshine, would get into their mountain shacks and just turn the stereo up full bore at 3 in the morning while they're into their schnapps or whatever they were doing. But again, it wasn't offensive. It was actually a beautiful sound that sort of just, as a background noise, that echoed around the mountains. I have very fond memories of both those two unusual boating noises. Okay, I just want to talk a little bit now about spend some time on cod. And the title of this slide of Cod, the Fish That Changed the World, is actually a title of a book that I can highly recommend to anyone if you're interested in reading it. So the photos here, the photo with the rainbow is one of my photos of a town called Henningsvær, where we went to a number of times. Beautiful little restored fishing village in the Lofoten Islands. The photo on the right, the black and white one, is taken from almost exactly the same position in 1951, showing the cod fishing fleet in port at that time. And the Lofotens are the cod fishing capital of Norway and that sort of northern part of the world. And on the left-hand side, you see that you've probably all seen photos before of the cod drying racks. The cod is an incredibly important part of the history and development and culture of not only Norway, but the entire North Atlantic coast, including New England and Nova Scotia and Greenland and Iceland, UK, Faroe Islands, and continues to be so, particularly in this part of the world. The Northwest Atlantic fisheries off the coast of the US and Canada, they have been shut down for at least 7 or 8 years now because they've just totally decimated the stocks there. Whereas in Norway, the fish stocks are close to record levels due to them having controlled the fisheries over a long period of time. And the main fishing season there is from January through to April, so through the depth of winter when the fish migrate from the Barents Sea to spawning grounds along the Norwegian coast. And the cod all over in the Atlantic, they're different tribes or whatever you call them, spawn in different areas. So the Norwegian stock comes from a different group that the North American stock come from. And so the drying process, they catch these fish during the middle of winter and then clean them and hang them in these racks. And they basically freeze dry for the first sort of 2 or 3 months until spring, and then they thaw out and air dry, and then they harvest them off the racks by about sort of June-ish. And from then, if they're properly stored, they'll last for years. The cod was being dried in this way already in Viking times, and it's argued that this is actually what facilitated their ability to do the most amazing explorations that they did in that time, because they had a durable source of protein to allow them to travel and do these journeys. And the fisheries on the western side of the Atlantic, on the US-Canadian coast, were actually pioneered by the Basque fishermen from northern Spain and the south of France, well before any European settlement over there. And when the first settlers went to the US, they found many well-established fishing camps that had been used for generations by the Basque fishermen. And cod is still a really popular food source in Spain, with their bacalao, their fish stew, which is the dried cod. The international trade in cod started pretty much in the 15th century, mainly by the Dutch and German trading companies, but really took off, interestingly, during the period of the slave trade. And this worked because the traders had needed to fill their ships with cargo in all the sections of the journeys that they were doing. And both the North American and the European slave traders would fill their boats with dried cod, sail them to West Africa, where they would pick up their slaves, unload most of the cod, keeping just enough on board to feed their cargo of slaves that they were going to take over to the Caribbean, sell the cod that they'd offloaded locally, then offload the slaves in the Caribbean, fill the holds up with molasses, and take them back for sugar and rum production, and then complete the triangle, just keep going round and round. So they always had full holds. And interesting, as a result of that, Nigeria, because of the huge amounts of cod that were delivered to Nigeria and then sold there locally, is still the biggest market for dried cod in the world to this day. We ate heaps of cod while we were in Norway. You can't avoid it. It's in every restaurant, and if you haven't eaten it, I can tell you it ranges between tasting like something like a cardboard Kellogg's packet to the most exquisite fish that you've ever tasted. We had one meal in a restaurant in Buda where the chef showed us the stock, which was it was as thin as a sheet of paper and almost transparent. That's how dried the fish had been, and then got soaked for 4 days, and then it was absolutely exquisite. The next thing I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about is the preservation of the marine maritime heritage in Norway, where we do a little bit of it here, and they probably do more in New Zealand, but in Norway they have a system of grants that's available for the restoration and preservation of historic vessels, which has led to a rich fleet of restored vessels, and accompanying that, a number of especially set-aside waterside areas of warehouses and the likes, where the owners of the boats are offered concessionary, mooring fees. They pay a shoestring fee, and the various warehouses are offered to traditional tradesmen who specialise in old engineering and forging and shipbuilding skills. So you get these communities of old boats being restored by enthusiasts, with funding being provided by the government to do that. And it's built up a wonderful fleet of historic vessels. The boat in this picture is a boat called Faxon, which we became very familiar with during the time that we were there, with her and her volunteer captain, a fellow called Idar Hendrickson, who ended up looking after Ada Hardy for us while she was based in Buda during the winter. And the Faxon was built in 1916 for codfish and then taken over by the German occupying forces during World War II and used as a patrol vessel, then returned to fishing until the late 60s, and is now owned by a charitable trust and staffed and maintained by volunteers led by this fellow Idar. And it's available for charters and regularly attends traditional boat festivals, and recently has been as far south as Portugal to attend a wooden boat festival. She's one of the most interesting things about her is she's fitted with a single cylinder 2-stroke Wichmann semi-diesel hot bulb engine. It's the most magnificent piece of machinery you've ever seen. It stands about 2 metres tall. It's one cylinder that's about this diameter. It weighs over 5 tonnes, this single cylinder engine. It turns over at 300 RPM, and it just makes the most magnificent sound. I'm just going to play this for you. There's a number of times where we'd just be sitting at anchor or cruising along quietly, and suddenly you'd hear this doof, 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 and you go, the Saxon's around here somewhere. And that noise would just echo through the fjords and the hills. It's just absolutely beautiful. Well, so now a little bit about our winter cruising session. As I said before, I think the objective of this winter cruise was firstly to experience the Northern Lights. That was the number one thing on our agenda. Also to do something completely different. And in part also to really test the cold weather systems on the boat for what I anticipated we'd be experiencing when we went to Greenland later in the year. So it was all a little bit of a test cruise. It was just Karen and myself. We arrived back. The locals all thought we were completely and utterly mad. The Norwegians don't go cruising in the middle of winter. But there's some really interesting things came out of it. Firstly, which I actually knew before we went, is that the entire Norwegian coast is ice-free all year round. Even as far north as 80 degrees latitude north, and it's because of the Gulf Stream that affects all of the European coastal climate goes on up the Norwegian coast and keeps the water temperature never drops below about 2 or 3 degrees. So there's never any ice there, which made the whole thing possible and made leaving the boat that far north through the course of winter possible as well, that it wasn't getting frozen in. The first sort of unusual experience that struck us when we arrived was this little image here of me having to shovel snow off the decks to be able to open the front door and actually get into the boat. I subsequently worked out that because the water temperature being what it was, if I used my deck wash hose, a big pump that just pumped seawater through, at 2 or 3 degrees, I could just run that all over and melt it. So after I'd shoveled the decks the first time, I never did again. I just hosed it all off every time it snowed after that. I think I've mentioned before that we've always liked to anchor as opposed to tying up alongside places, and we were doing the same thing during the winter. And it was after about a week we decided to go into a little town to do some provisioning and the likes. And the next surprise hit me is that as I was going through my routine, approaching the dock of getting all the mooring lines out, which I always leave outside, I found them all to be completely and utterly frozen stiff, unable to uncoil them. I had to get them all, put them all in the main saloon and do laps for half an hour or so while the heating melted all the ropes down so as we could use them. And then pulling up alongside the dock, when Karen and I are just on board alone, routine, my job is to get the boat hard up alongside the dock in the first place so Karen can delicately step off and put the one spring that I need onto the right cleat to then be able to drive the boat into the dock and keep it there while I do everything else. Well, the first dock we turned up at was covered in about 2 feet of snow and no sign of any cleats or anything else. So actually encouraging Karen to take that leap of faith to go, just jump off the boat into that snow and somewhere you will find some cleats was a fairly interesting discussion for a little while. And the other interesting thing was that an appliance that you'd rarely see as useful on a boat was Karen's hairdryer, which I've got used every single day when overnight hatches and fittings and stuff froze solid, and the only way to get them open again in the morning was to Karen's hairdryer out was to melt all the ice and snow and to be able to then go and do what you were doing. So anyway, overall, look, it was a really fun time. Everything went really smoothly, and I would definitely go and do it again. I enjoyed it. It was just so uniquely different to things we normally do that you got to do it. Whoop. Okay, so now we move on to. So this is 2019 in May. We started off back in Buda, and our plan for that season was to head back south down to a town called Floro, which is our hopping off point to then go to the Shetland Islands, where we spent 10 days, and then across from there to the Faroe Islands, where we spent another 10 days, 14 days. And with 24-hour crossing from Floro to the Shetlands, about another 12 hours longer to get to Faroe, so sort of 36, about 48 hours from there to Iceland. And then we spent a month doing a lap around the top end of Iceland to Reykjavik on the southwestern coast. The reason we went that way was primarily because we wanted to see more of Iceland, but also the south coast of Iceland is very barren. There's very shallow. There's no ports. It's really quite inhospitable. And Karen left the boat in Reykjavik at the end of July, and my 3 crew for the trip to Greenland and then south down to Newfoundland, and eventually in May joined us in Reykjavik. It was then a nearly 3-day trip across from Reykjavik to Kulusuk. We then spent a month on the east coast of Greenland from Kulusuk down to the bottom end, or Cape Farewell or Kap Farvel, which is a distance of about 450 miles. We saw one other yacht in that entire month that we were there, and we saw the supply ship that services Kulusuk once as well, and that was the only interaction we had with civilization the entire time that we were there. And from there we didn't actually follow the route to Goose Bay. We went straight to Newfoundland due to the weather conditions, and then worked our way down the coast and eventually to Maine. But firstly, before we go, I just want to talk a little bit more about Buda, the harbour where the boat had spent the winter. Buda is a town with a population of about 50,000 people. It's sort of the northern capital or the capital of northern Norway. It's an hour and a half flight from Oslo. There's at least 4 flights a day each way. So it's extraordinarily convenient to be able to get to. They made a perfect sort of stopping off point for us. And without a doubt, it has been the best and friendliest port that we have left the boat in the entire 10 years that we've been underway up until then. Bear in mind that we leave the boat every season. We don't, for long periods of time and then go back. The harbour is in the centre of town. Great restaurants, great facilities, and the harbour master, like a public servant, not a private operation. The most helpful person on earth, I think, that I've ever struck. He couldn't have done more for us. The photo on the bottom right is actually a photo that I took, but it's almost identical to the view from a harbour webcam that I could sit in my study in Sydney and monitor the boat 24 hours a day and see exactly what was going on at any point in time. And to boot it all off even more is that it's the first place since we left Australia where I was able to find somebody who had the right fittings to be able to fill my gas bottles. It is without a doubt the biggest challenge. Every country in the world seems to have a different regulation, a different size fitting, and every time we had to fill them, you'd have to hassle around with hardware stores and make up little bits and pieces to eventually get it. This guy said, no, I can do that, no problem. So we arrived, as I said early, in sort of the first week in May, and we're really lucky to experience Norway's version of Australia Day, which is Norway Day, or they call it Constitution Day, which happens on the 17th of May. And the photo on the left of all the pretty girls is not one of my photos, but an example of that. They take the day, it's a very special day for them. It's based around children and traditional values and traditional costumes, and everybody dresses up to the nines. The ladies, the men, the kids, and these traditional costumes are all different because each one is unique to the particular village or region or precinct that they come from. I was on board the boat in the photo in the snow, but without the snow, and had planned my beginning of season outside boat clean, which would normally take me about 4 or 5 hours. But alongside the boat was the main promenade for all of everyone walking to and from town in their absolute finery. And this 4 or 5 hour job on this occasion, at the end of 9 hours, I was still only halfway through because I'd spent the whole day watching the eye candy and talking to them and engaging with the locals. It was a delightful day. Run my clock now. Yeah, I'll move on. But Buda was fantastic, and we were really actually sad to leave there, and we'd made some really good friends in the time that we'd been there, and we both really look forward to going back. Something I just want to actually say, because otherwise I'll forget, is that through all of this, my wife Karen here has been a 100% partner in this project, and without her complete and utter enthusiasm and commitment to it, none of this would ever have happened. She's I'd be dead meat if I hadn't actually remembered to mention it. The other thing that we actually really felt quite sentimental about when we were on our leaving Norway was the Hurtigruten, which is the ferry service that runs up and down the Norwegian coast that some of you may well have already travelled on or be aware of. Hurtigruten actually means fast route, is its translation, and it was established in 1893 as a route between Bergen in the south and Kirkenes in the far north, as a trip that takes 6 days. And it was established as a ferry and still operates as a ferry, even though it now also doubles as a cruise ship tour. And there's a ship that leaves every day from the northern end and from the southern end. So if you stay in the same place on the route, you'll see 2 of these ships every day, like clockwork going past. And over the 4 months that we were there, it became you'd hear the sound of the engine coming. Oh, here comes the Hurtigruten. It was sort of just a little joke between us that it just became very, very fond of seeing them. And it was sad to sort of go like we're going to miss them. And the photo of the oldest ship of the bottom is actually was the oldest ship in the fleet at the time, that is now retired, and we were just absolutely coincidentally leaving Trondheim as it was coming into port, escorted by a fire spray ship and whatever on its final voyage before being retired. So, yeah. So now we'll move on to actually getting underway. And so this section from Bodo to Reykjavik, as I mentioned before, we first stopped the Shetland Islands, which quite frankly we found it was interesting to go there, but it was a bit lackluster compared to the spectacular scenery of Norway. It's low-lying, it's dour and wet. The British never got into the brightly coloured painting their houses. They thought that just grey stone looked just fine in the dreary weather. But I'm going to tell you what I think is an interesting story about a thing called Muckle Flugger and the Shetland bus, but I'll do that in a minute. The little birds up in the top right-hand corner, puffins, extraordinary little creatures that caused us enormous amount of joy and pleasure. We first saw them in the Shetlands, not too many, but as we went across to the Faroes and then Iceland, they became more and more prolific. They're really very poor flies. They're more a fish than they are a bird, and they got tiny little wings, and they reputedly can dive down to like 90 metres. They spend 10 months a year at sea during the winter. The only time they come to land is to breed in the summer for a couple of months, and apparently they sleep when they're at sea, and their flippers, their paddles keep going to keep while they're asleep, just automatically to keep them facing head to wind, and an enormous and extraordinary bit of evolution. But the amusing thing of them was they're very flighty animals, and as you approach them on the boat, they had two ways of escaping from this imminent threat. And one was, which was a smart way, was to dive, because they just dive, and that was the last that you ever saw of them, and until you bypassed. But occasionally, they would decide that they were going to fly away instead. And this involved an unbelievable amount of these tiny little wings flapping away and their little legs going beating away in the water trying to get the traction till eventually, it took about 50 metres, they eventually get up in the air, and they'd fly for about 50 metres and then come down to land, which inevitably was a complete face plant and a double somersault before they'd look around and go, have I got far enough away yet? And then half the time, repeat the whole process again. So we spent hours amusing ourselves just, tracking down flocks of puffins on the water to watch this spectacle. The Faroe Islands, absolutely indescribably majestic scenery. The bottom corner with the big high cliffs. Extraordinary place. Apparently has the oldest parliament in the world. It has its own airline. It's 50,000 people population. It's a sort of autonomous region of Denmark, totally self-governing and self-funding. Economy's based on just fishing and sheep farming. They've got their own airline that has 4 times a week trip to Copenhagen. Most amazing infrastructure with roads and buses and ferries and tunnels. It's just mind-boggling how this tiny group of people could have been so industrious to have created this economy. The most spectacular part on the northwest coast is the cliffs that are shown in that photo in the bottom right-hand corner that tower up to 1,000 metres straight out of the water. Apparently they're the highest sea cliffs in the world. And we were unbelievably blessed that we had 2 days of almost flat calm weather. We were able to mosey around the bottom of these cliffs and just marvel at the scenery. If you ever get an opportunity to go to the Faroe Islands, I know it's a long way away from anywhere, but I can recommend it to everybody. It's just stunning. There's nothing else like it in the world that I've seen. From there, then across to Iceland, which, the scenery inland in Iceland, as everybody these days is one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world, is absolutely spectacular, extraordinary, and we saw lots of that because we did lots of sort of inland road travelling stuff. As a cruising destination, it's not particularly attractive. The weather is highly changeable. The coastline is very exposed and barren, long distance between safe harbours and anchorages. So really quite challenging from a cruising point of view, but still utterly rewarding in terms of experiencing the country. So now I'll give you another little slideshow of our trip from Buda through to Reykjavik.
On the road again, just can't wait to get on the road again. The life I love is making music with my friends, and I can't wait to get on the road again. On the road again, going places that I've never been, seeing things that I may never see again. I can't wait to get on the road again. On the road again, like a band of gypsies, we go down the highway. We're the best of friends, insisting that the world keep turning our way. And our way is on the road again. I just can't wait to get on the road again. The life I love is making music with my friends, and I can't wait to get on the road again. Just can't wait to get on the road again. The life I love is making music with my friends, and I can't wait to get on the road again. And I can't wait to get on the road again.
I love the photo of that. If you notice it, the rock with like the crocheted rug on it. It's this tiny little town in the Faroes where this village, the women every winter they each like do a square metre of crocheting and make a new cover for this rock for some reason. And they've been doing it for decades and decades and decades. And every year the new crochet blanket goes onto this rock, and each year it's different from the year before. Okay, Muckleflugger and the Shetland bus. Muckleflugger I just put in there because it's actually, I just love the word. It's actually some Celtic thing that means big rock. And it's the northernmost point of the United Kingdom, to the north of the Shetland Islands. The more interesting part of the story is the story of the Shetland bus, which some of you here might know about. But I didn't have a clue until we walked up to this monument of this vessel that looks extraordinarily like Ada Hardy, a lot of similarities, and started reading in the inscriptions around it about this thing called the Shetland bus, and that there was also a museum in town about this. The Shetland bus was when the Germans occupied Norway in the Second World War, as opposed to Faxon, which got taken over and turned into a patrol ship, a lot of Norwegian fishing vessels escaped, left, and headed to the Shetland Islands, because that was the closest point to Norway for them to get away. And the British and Norwegian Special Operations Forces then commissioned a lot of these fishermen to run missions back into Norway to bring agents, British agents into Norway, and to supply arms and radios and equipment to resistance movements within Norway. And this operation became known as the Shetland bus. I spent like 4 hours inside this tiny museum. It'd be smaller than this room, reading every word on the wall and looking at every picture. It was just absolutely fascinating. And there's a fella called Leif Larsen, who was one of the captains or owners of one of these fishing vessels, who carried out 52 excursions during the course of the war from the Shetland Islands back into Norway, and ended up, even though he was a non-commissioned officer but had been seconded into the special forces, as being the most highly decorated naval officer in the entire Second World War out of all of the Allied forces through his heroic actions. And through spending the time in the museum, a link actually emerged with the Faxen that I'd shown you earlier, where the Faxen, armed or manned by the Germans, actually foiled a mission led by this Leif Larsen to try and sink a German battleship called the Tirpitz in the town of Trondheim. So all of a sudden I sort of ended up feeling this sort of warm fuzzy feeling of almost sort of belonging to this story, because Ada Hardy was there in Scalloway in the same town, and she looks extraordinarily like the photo there, and we were good friends with the people who own and run the Faxen, and the story just gave me a warm sense of belonging. Righto, Greenland. Visiting the east coast of Greenland on my own boat is without doubt the most adventurous thing that I've done in my lifetime, and has allowed me to dispense with my mission of going to South Georgia, where too many other people have been to. Greenland is the world's largest island. It's like a bit like Faroes, a self-governing autonomous region of Denmark, and Denmark still retains control of foreign affairs and defence, but pumps a fair bit of money into keeping the locals fed and clothed and housed. It's got a total population of 60,000, most of which is concentrated on the southwest coast of Greenland rather than on the east coast. There is only one town, which is this town of Kulusuk, Talisak, where we arrived at, which has a population of 2,000. And that is the only permanent settlement on the entire east coast of Greenland. There's one town of 2,000 people. The rest of it is completely uninhabited, apart from two smaller villages that are inhabited only during the summer for fishing purposes, but they don't live there during the winter. We spent, as I said, I think earlier, 4 weeks to cover the 450 miles between Kulusuk and Cape Farvel, so we had lots of time to really explore and check the place out. It took more than 2 years of planning on my part and research and learning to build up the confidence to take on this part of the trip. And I'll go into some of the navigational and boating issues associated with cruising in that environment. But one of the most important considerations for me was the selection of crew. It wasn't the sort of trip that I just wanted to take a couple of mates along. I was looking for a team of people that were there for their own particular personal attributes, and that we could work as a team and independently in an incredibly remote and hostile environment. And I ended up picking 3 buddies. They're all buddies of mine, but the 3 of them, none of them had ever met each other before I invited them on the trip, and they'd accepted, other than we got together before I left Australia, and that was the first time they'd ever met each other. We ended up 7 weeks on board together, never an argument, laughed every night, and it was the most cohesive group of people I've ever been with, and without that this trip would never have been as successful as what it was. And maybe I was lucky, I don't know, maybe I just did a good job sort of picking the right people for the right job. So I'll move on to some of the challenges. First one is charts. So the white and yellow blob on the left is an electronic navigation chart of a part of the area we're at, zoomed into its highest possible level. You will notice there is not one sounding on that chart. There is an unbelievable lack of detail. We went through this area, and I can assure you that most of those islands are at least 1 mile or 2 miles out of position from reality. There are numerous small islands that don't appear on the chart at all. And this is just typical of the entire east coast of Greenland. It's been very, very poorly charted because nobody ever goes there. The Danish produced the charts. I actually had the paper charts as well, and they had absolutely no more detail than what the electronic charts had, because after all, the electronic charts are just taken off the paper chart as a source in the first place. I actually found I've also managed to get hold of a number of topographical maps like the ones on the left, which I actually found far more useful most of the time because they did have more detail, at least you get some idea of the topography that you were entering into, where you were going into a steep-sided gorge or a flat valley, which would give you some clues as to the sort of depth of water that you might be encountering as to where you were going. So GPS was in many extent somewhat useless because of the inaccuracy of the charts, and you're really relying on radar and eyeball Mark 1 method to work out where you were, and a lot of diligence all the time looking for hidden underwater obstacles, which fortunately we didn't find any seriously. The next thing is the whole issue of ice. And on this map is a series of ice charts, which are, again, they're produced by the Danish Meteorological Office, and they're issued, they're not a forecast, they're an actual record of actual conditions, and they're created through satellite imagery. So there can be times when you don't get any update on the ice charts because they haven't had enough satellite images to be able to work out how much ice is in particular areas. All the egg-shaped things that you see there each relate to a different area on the chart, and they describe the amount of ice that is there, the concentration of ice, as in which is generally described in tenths of the water surface. So if the number is 2, it means that 2/10 of the water surface is covered in ice, and if it's 9, it's 9/10. And then it goes down to different levels that talks about the thickness of the ice versus its concentration and the stage of development. The older the ice, the harder it is. And then finally, it also talks about the shape and the form of the ice, whether it's in big icebergs or whether it's brash ice or whatever. The main thing that was of interest, of concern to us, is the concentration of ice, because it's accepted that in a vessel that's not reinforced for working in ice like ours and any other normal yacht, it is completely unfeasible to try and navigate your way through anything more than a 3/10 concentration of ice. So our primary concern was to know whether the ice was of greater concentration than that or not. The picture on the right from where you guys are looking at it was ice in June of the year that we were there, remembering that we arrived in August. And as you can see there, the west coast of Greenland is pretty much ice-free, and it's a similar thing that happens in Norway. There's actually a warm current that runs up the west coast of Greenland, and which is why the majority of people in Greenland live on the southwest coast, whereas the eastern side is got a cold current that comes down from the Arctic and keeps it icebound a lot of the time. And in fact, the area where we approached, which is sort of halfway down the east coast, is often icebound 12 months of the year. So we're actually quite fortunate to have found a year where we were able to access that part of the east coast and enjoy it for a whole month. And again, it's a reason why there's so incredibly few boats, and there's no cruise ships, go there, because it's so unreliable for it to be accessible. And in fact, the year before we went, we wouldn't have been able to access the east coast at all, and our backup plan, if that was going to occur, was to have headed straight down to the southernmost tip of Greenland and then spend our time on the west coast instead. But as I said, as it turned out, we were able to enjoy the east coast completely and utterly to ourselves. Then you get into the area of icebergs, and the two photos that I've got here show the sort of typical conditions that we dealt with while we were there. And the photo on the left with the big iceberg in it, you can see, I think the people in the other room won't be able to see this, but over here, that's Ada Hardy. So that little speck there, that puts that iceberg, the scale of that iceberg, into perspective. But the water surface that you see there and the ice that's there is probably at a level of about 2/10. So at the getting towards the top end of the sort of navigable spectrum. The ice in the second photo is probably at sort of 4/10 type density, Now, we did mosey our way all the way in there in a perfectly, as you can see, perfectly calm day, travelling at absolute dead slow speed, and we actually sort of nudged a few blocks of ice out of the way. And you've got to remember that 9/10 of any bit of ice you see on the surface, 9/10 is underwater. Even a piece of ice the size of the table it would probably be a 10-ton block of ice when you add in all the ice that's sitting underwater. So it's certainly not something that you want to run into really at any speed. Ice comes in two forms. Nearly all the ice we encountered was glacier ice, so fresh water, so it's broken off the front of glaciers, as opposed to sea ice, which is frozen seawater and then it's then broken off and become icebergs made out of sea ice. The only way that we could find to tell them apart was to break a bit off and put it in a Scotch glass and see whether it still tasted all right or not. You can't tell by just looking at them. Icebergs ice and icebergs do two things. One, the icebergs that come off glaciers, they've broken off the front, they call it calving. Glaciers are forever carving icebergs, and all the ice that you see in these two photos is glacier ice that's carved off icebergs. But icebergs themselves also carve, like the big berg in the photo. Would not be unusual for a quarter of that to suddenly, completely unexpectedly, crack off and break off, creating a semi-tsunami. And we saw that happen many times. So you learn a healthy respect to sort of stay clear and be very vigilant in terms of what this berg might or might not do. And in fact, the photo on the one with the boat and the close-up with the icebergs, the berg on the bow of the boat, while we were sitting there, it did actually start to roll. And remember, again, like 9/10 of that berg is underwater, and we sort of moseyed our way in between the two. And it was only that I happened to be in the wheelhouse at the helm when I saw it starting to roll and was able to quickly reverse out of there. Otherwise, we could easily have been forced into the berg on this side of the boat and caused damage. So again, like we sort of learned a lesson there that maybe don't get quite so close. The other thing that we learned was that I think a couple of nights earlier, after a fairly boisterous dinner, we developed this ambitious plan that we were going to find an easily mountable and level iceberg and bring the drone, and all four of us get on board, get the drone up in the air and strip naked and get a series of stunning photographs of the four of us naked on this iceberg. Well, anyway, this rolling iceberg that day cured us of that ambition. So you'll all be spared those photos today because they don't exist. And then if that's not enough to keep you occupied and on your toes, there's fog. And we experienced an enormous amount of fog during the time that we were there. Fortunately, normally it'd burn off by sort of midday or during the course of the day, and became totally reliant on radar in those circumstances. And as it fortunately turns out, ice is an unbelievably good reflector for radar. And a piece of ice the size of a serving plate, only this high above the water, if the water's relatively calm, shows up magnificently on the radar. And on that radar image that I've got there, the ones closer in are literally very, very small bits of ice. So we became quite confident of actually travelling in the fog, often not being able to see more than 10 or 20 metres beyond the bow of the boat, relying partly on radar. So whoever's on the helm is monitoring the radar, and then we'd always have one person either side, outside the wheelhouse doors, using the eyeball method, and developed a routine of off the radar going, berg 200 metres port side, 10 degrees. And then as soon as the person on that side saw it, they would confirm, yep, there it is. And then we know, okay, good, we've got that one. And work our way through this basically totally relying on the radar to work our way through. And we did that for day after day after day, and became really quite confident over it after a while. But without a radar, it would be impossible. But wait, there's more. Polar bears. Polar bears are scarce, but they are a definite threat in Greenland. The locals do not venture out unless they are armed. When I first started to become aware of this and research this, I've never had any experience with firearms. Decided no, we're not going to have a firearm on board. There's things called bear bangers, which are like a glorified firecracker and stuff like that. I said we're going to do it that way. And as I spoke to more people locally who they said you're mad. You need to have a firearm. So I ended up buying a 30-06 single action, a bolt action rifle, powerful bit of kit, which in Greenland you don't need a license for. If it's that calibre, if it's any smaller you do, and specifically because it's recognised as being required for defence against polar bears. I've fortunately got a brother-in-law who's a firearm nutter in Queensland. I went and spent 3 days with him, and he happened to have exactly the same rifle that I'd ordered. So I spent 3 days with him learning how to use the thing and use it safely. And fortunately, we never had to use it in anger, but we had a lot of fun shooting beer cans and cardboard boxes and the likes while we were there. The rifle, I surrendered the rifle when we arrived in Canada, and it's now sitting in a gun safe somewhere in Newfoundland, waiting for our return to pick it up and go on with the next adventure. Okay, so now I got this is, it's a longer video, a 9-minute video of our time in Greenland. Out of all of my video shows, this is the one I'm most proud of. It's had most amount of work go into it, and I hope you enjoy.
Kvinner
So, almost there. We had 1,700 miles to travel after we'd finished in Greenland to get to our final destination still, so we had plenty of work to do. We've started with a 5-day passage across from the bottom of Greenland to Newfoundland. And when we arrived in Newfoundland, I don't know if you guys remember, but the year before last there was a hurricane called Dorian that was starting to menace the east coast of the United States, and already, a long way in advance, was forecast to actually travel up the coast and basically directly towards where we were trying to get to. And this sort of definitely affected, we were planning to have we had sort of 3 weeks to do this passage, and we're hoping to spend a fair bit of time exploring Newfoundland and Nova Scotia in particular, but this hurricane started to impact on our plans. As it turned out, it almost passed directly over the top of us, and we'd strategically put ourselves in a place called the Bras-d'Or Lakes, which are in Newfoundland, and I went there because it's a lake system, and you enter through a series of locks. And my concern was, I've got a huge amount of faith in our anchors and ground tackle, as long as I got enough room to put enough chain down, but was very worried about being in a bay or an area with large storm surge, and particularly if somewhere being tied up against wharves where there's potential for a large storm surge. So we picked the lakes knowing that we wouldn't have the storm surge, and that you weren't going to have to suffer with swell, and that the only thing we did have to deal with was wind potentially. And the day before the cyclone was due to come through, we're talking to some locals. They'd sort of suggested various hurricane holes, as they call them, around the area that might be suitable for us to go and anchor in. And we went there, and the bottom was incredibly soft and muddy, and not enough scope for me to put enough chain out, and just with even quarter throttle in reverse I was dragging the anchor. So we decided to go back to town dock at a place called Baddeck. It's actually the home of Alexander Graham Bell. Very interesting museum there dedicated to Alexander Graham Bell. And we tied up on this dock, figuring that we might be able to it seemed the best option at the time. And the sort of photo in the top right-hand corner shows us tied up. I've got hundreds of metres of green polyethylene line that I'd purchased to use for securing ourselves inside fjords and stuff like that, which we never actually had to use. This was the first time I got the ropes out of the locker. And we had like a spider's web of lines with the whole boat lined up. And then the taller photo on the right is actually a little video I'll show you now. And this is about 8 hours before the storm was due to pass over. And we're already sort of starting to bounce around quite a lot alongside this hard commercial dock. But we're being blown off the wharf, so it was all comfortable. But then sort of as we're getting close to nightfall, the wind started to track round to the right, and we weren't being held off the side of the dock quite as much anymore. And I went through a drill with the guy. I said, look, if we've got to get out of here, we had very little room. You can't see it, but on the other side there was very little sea room for us to get out. It's quite a tight little spot. So if we've got to go, we're going to go in a hurry, and I don't want anybody getting off the boat, because half a chance I won't get you back on, or you won't even get off the boat safely. So we said, we're going to dump all of these lines, just going to get dumped straight on the dock. We'll come back and pick them up tomorrow or the next day if we have to. And there was 2 lines that we would need to cut because they were secured. It was the only way we could get them loose. So we positioned a knife next to each one of those. And lo and behold, about 3 hours later, the wind had gone round, and we were starting to get pushed onto the dock instead with a substantial, slop seaway. So I pulled the let's get out of here button, and everything went like clockwork. It took us about 30 seconds to get all the lines off, cut the 2 lines, and we got out. And my plan was that even if we need to just steam around the lake for 12 hours or 24 hours, we're not going to be facing huge seas, and it's a better option than lying alongside the dock. As it turned out, we did find an anchorage that we were able to anchor in, and rode out the rest of the storm and came back the next day. And the fishing vessel that you see in front of us on that photo, it stayed at the dock, and it suffered substantial damage both to its top sides, and also demolished nearly that part of the dock that it was tied up alongside. So it turned out to be a good decision at the time, and a and the end of our trip. But we lost sort of 3 days in the process, and then when we went to leave out of the southern end of the lake, where we had to go through another lock to get out, the storm had wiped out the power supply, so the lock was shut down, so we got stuck there for another 3 days before we could get underway. But anyway, it all ended up well. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. The Ada Hardy glass is empty. The boat languishes in Belfast, Maine, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I haven't seen the boat since end of September 2019, and think it's at this stage unlikely that I'm going to see the boat this year. And as we all know, leaving a boat sitting there with doing nothing is the worst thing that can happen to a boat. So I'm not looking forward to having to get the whole program back up and running again in the sort of reliable form that it was in. Anyway, it is what it is. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. I've enjoyed giving this presentation. But I have to say, I'm going to leave here somewhat apprehensively, wondering whether I'm the first person to have, albeit virtually, bared their ass in the dining room of the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron. And more importantly, whether I'm going to get away with it and be invited back on a future occasion. Thank you.
But thank you for sparing us that full-frontal version. Hugo will take some questions from the floor now, and we've got a roving microphone. We'll start in the Carabella room. Does anybody like to? Yes, there's one at the back there. JT will bring the microphone to you.
Thank you, JT. Hugo, my question's not for you, but for Karen. To set off on a adventure like this requires remarkable partnership, and you referred to that in your talk. I'm kind of interested, my wife and I have done a bit of cruising the inland waterways of Europe, kind of interested what training you put in and how you felt you could cope with this if something happened to Hugo.
Do you want to come here?
Wasn't expecting this. Well, firstly, mainly what I can say is that I rely on Hugo implicitly. He is my rock, my anchor. If I know that he feels that it's the safe thing and the right thing to do, I would follow him to the end of the earth. And so, yeah, that's how I feel. Yeah, it makes it easy. It's we're a partnership, and he leads, I follow, and I follow with 100% of faith in Hugo. So.
Just a question. I noticed that apart from those funny birds that you followed and the gannet, there was very little life in any of your pictures. Didn't you not see whales and orcas and seals, and were animals part of the project?
It's very observant and extraordinarily little life. In Norway in particular, like birds, very few, nothing like the level of birds and sea life that we have here. Occasionally we'd see some dolphins, but they're not just like the dolphins here that want to follow your boat. The dolphins over there just seem totally disinterested, and they just be glanced past.
It's a different language.
Yeah, probably. Whales we saw some, but you see way more up and down the east coast of Australia. Even in Greenland, like there was very few whales, the occasional seal. Nothing like the level of wildlife that we have here.
But your scenery was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do, Hugo, we'll just try to get a question from the other room at the moment, and
sure.
I'll just go and check on that. Yeah. Yeah. Biff has the microphone. Does anybody have a question? Thank you.
No. Oh, there we go. It's working. Very good. Yeah, I got a question for you. I noticed that most of the photographs you put were idyllic in terms of flat water, nice clear skies, and I get that because when the weather's bad, you got more important things to worry about. My question is: so, what was actually the weather like generally? Was it generally calm? Was it generally bad? What was it like?
The weather, the 2018 in Norway was pretty much like every photo that you saw for 3 or 4 months straight. We had maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 days at the most in a 4-month period that you could describe as inclement. A lot of the time, because of the sheltered waters, even if it was windy, it didn't matter because you're still in flat water, so it wasn't preventing you from going anywhere because you didn't have to go out to sea effectively. All of the passages that the crossings and stuff, I always maintain a very flexible schedule and work extremely hard on route planning and the weather forecasting to make sure that we're, if possible, always travelling in the most ideal conditions. And I believe that with the weather forecasting and weather modelling these days, that there's absolutely no reason, if you have the time and you're not trying to meet some schedule that's taking you to sea when you shouldn't, any passage of up to 4 days, there's absolutely no reason to expose yourself to any nasty or inclement weather, and we never did the entire trip. We had plenty of particularly in Greenland and Iceland, had plenty of bad weather come through, but always made sure that we were in a secure place until that weather blew over. But interesting too, I mean, I've say it often that I think that out of all of my travels at sea around the world, the New South Wales coast and Bass Strait is the most gnarly, nastiest, uncomfortable piece of water in the world. Like, I mean, we went all the way up the Atlantic coast of Europe. It's the Bay of Biscay. For an entire summer we spent there, and I think we tucked away in a hidey hole on 2 occasions for a couple of days. The rest of the time it was the Atlantic Ocean was flat calm. No, we do it much tougher here than they do over there. I'm convinced of that.
During the entirety of that superb footage, we saw but one shot of a hoisted sail. I'm just wondering how often the vessel was propelled in the correct manner.
Well, the answer is never, because that sail doesn't propel the boat at all. It's there purely as a additional stabilising mechanism. The boat's fitted with dynamic hydraulic stabilisers, which do an extraordinary job in keeping life unbelievably comfortable on board. But with the wind coming from the right direction, and it's got to be blowing at least 20 knots for it to be of any use, it does actually steady the boat a little bit more and also actually saves a little bit of fuel. But I rarely put it up, like it's be once in a blue moon. So we travel incorrectly most of the time.
Yeah. Here you go. We've got a question from Neutral Bay Room now.
Go ahead.
Is it on? I've heard that photographing the Northern Lights is not easy, and I'm very disappointed that as you did a special cruise, there were no photos.
But interestingly, it is extraordinarily difficult, and we were very fortunate to have a Northern Lights episode, and as it turned out, this Idar Hendrickson, the fellow that runs the Faxon, he knew where we were anchored that night, and he happened to be driving in the nearby vicinity and rang me and said, are you outside? Like, the Northern Lights are going now, and they're actually really good. Like, I haven't seen them like this for ages. And we were outside and we were watching them, and it was an interesting spectacle, but it was nowhere near as spectacular as the photos that you see of the Northern Lights. And I tried to take photos of it, and they were just completely pathetic. They were just, it was impossible So I actually think that, and so he was someone who was very familiar with Northern Lights, said these are actually a good example of them. We were a little bit underwhelmed by it in the flesh, even though it was still an extraordinary spectacle. And certainly from a photography point of view, near on, well, I was certainly failed completely in terms of trying to capture it. So I think a lot of the really classy footage that you see of Northern Lights is with, you know, very clever time-lapse photography and all sorts of techniques, and that it's much better on film than it is in real life, I think.
I was going to ask you about the Northern Lights, but the other question was how many months each year did you spend on the boat, or did you come home each?
Yeah, we've always come home every year, and generally been spending about 4 months of the year, 4 months a year. Except for the time we were in Thailand, we were going back and forth a lot, but ever since then, about 4 months of the year. Through most of this time, it's only in the last year or two that I haven't been working. Prior to that, I've been sort of working all the way through this as well, so I needed to come back and show my face every now and then.
We've got one more for Neutral Bay, Hugo, just coming up now, and then I think we better wrap it up.
Firstly, thank you, Hugo, for your presentation, and for Karen, your amazing wife, to have accompanied your through thick and thin, and ice, probably. And just wondering how you went with the provisioning, and whether you saw polar bear, whether we did the Arctic in the same year, in the same month, a little differently, but we tried polar bear and whale. I'm just wondering whether you tried that, and also how did you cope with along the way?
In terms of polar bear, we never saw any and never ate any, although we did in the village of Kulusuk, somebody had killed a bear just recently, and they were dividing it up amongst the villagers. It's a big cultural thing that if a bear does get caught, it's a delicacy, and it's traditional that it gets shared amongst everyone. The hunter who caught it obviously gets the biggest piece, but everybody gets a share. Whale, I definitely tried while we were in Norway, and they eat whale a lot. And the first time we tried it was in a very, very nice restaurant, and I actually thought there was a person who was sitting next to me was eating. We were on a communal table. I thought it was a carpaccio, and I said, I didn't see carpaccio on the menu, and she said, well, I don't eat fish. And I go, well, fine, but she said, but this is whale. And I said, well, that's fish. She said, no, it's not, it's whale. Then, okay, you're right. And I think I tried it, and it was absolutely delightful. It literally tasted like carpaccio. And then on another occasion, I ordered whale in a restaurant, and it was one of the foulest things that I've ever put in my mouth. So a bit like the codfish, I think there's a big range between good whale and not so good whale. Provisioning, I could talk for hours just about the whole side of provisioning. So I won't, because I'll never stop. But it is a big issue, particularly somewhere like Reno. We had to provision for 6 weeks for 4 people for absolutely everything. But anyway, it worked. We got the room on board to store it, and with the right planning and whatever. And the other thing, keeping things cool in Greenland was pretty easy. I just had a big esky up on deck with the lid open, and kept it beautifully at about 2 degrees all day. So we were still eating fresh carrots and stuff after 6 weeks. So it was bought all the meat in the Shetland Islands actually, and for that whole trip. But yeah.
You go. Quickly, did you get what sort of fish did you catch up?
Not cod is the only thing we actually caught. In Greenland, we caught nothing. Tried, and that we were warned before we went. They said they'll be really, really unlikely. There are no fish there. And in Norway, if you know where to fish, like they just jump on the end of a hook. But if you don't, they don't. But so those 2 fish that I had in the one photo, that was actually in Iceland.
Very impressive.
Yeah. Well, that took me about 2 minutes. I went out in the thick fog, got just out of sight of the boat, threw a line over the side, pulled in those 2 cod, and came back 5 minutes later. But I'm not a big fisherman. I only tend to fish if I'm wanting to eat fish, not for the sake of going fishing. So I don't have a lot of patience for it.
All right, well, thank you, Hugo. It's wonderful stories, wonderful visuals, the pictures and videos were fantastic. I'd just like our club captain, Karen, to come and thank you and present a present we've got for you for your trouble.
So on behalf of everybody here, the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron and of course our cruising committee, I'd really like to thank both Hugo and Karen for sharing your adventures with us. I think we've all been inspired, even if you have to cross over to the dark side. I think you had me at the Kimberley trip, but you know, to go all the way to the Northern Hemisphere was seriously impressive. But not only do we need to improve our boat skills, we need to learn how to fly a drone, learn how to edit a movie. You know, it was really an incredible evening, and thank you very much for sharing with us.
I think Karen knew what was happening. There's a pair of Speedos in here.